Hello, in this video we're going to learn how to write an event-driven program. So we're going to implement event handlers to process events from different GUI controls. For example, we can listen for button presses and then have something occur inside our program whenever the user presses a button. So by the end of this video, what we're going to end up with is a JavaFX program. Here's my window. And what we're going to have in the middle of the window is a circle. And then at the bottom of the window, there will be two buttons. One that says enlarge and one that says shrink. And then what will happen is when the user presses the enlarge button, this circle will get bigger. When they press shrink, the circle will get smaller. And we'll use event handlers to stitch all this logic together so that it just happens, which will be exactly what we want. So over in Eclipse, we will create a new project, a JavaFX project, and I'll call this control circle. Next up, we will add a class to this in the default package, also called control circle. Okay, now there are a lot of classes we need to import into this program to make it work, but rather than type all these in manually, I'm going to rely on Eclipse's code completion to do this for me. So this is what I mean. Maximize this to give us some space. We need our control circle class to extend application. So what I'm going to do is just start typing and then press control space. And there we go, it's found application for us. So when we press enter now, you can see that it automatically adds the import for us, which is exactly what we want. So inside our class, what we're going to do is implement our start method. And this takes a stage as its parameter. So again, type the class name stage, hit control space, and press enter, and it automatically adds the import for us. Call this primary stage. Right. So what we're going to do first is create our buttons. Now, remember, we've got two buttons positioned side by side at the bottom of our window. So what we're going to use to do this is a horizontal box, because this will automatically arrange our buttons so that they're nicely spaced horizontally. So hbox, hit control space again to add that. Default constructor. And what we're going to do now is set the spacing to give some spacing between our two buttons. So hbox.set spacing, and we'll set this to 10. Next up, we'll set the alignment, because we want our buttons to be centered on the window. So hbox.set alignment. We're going to use pos.center. There we go. Next up, we're going to create our two buttons. So we need a button, hit control space, get the import, bt enlarge. Remember, it takes a string as its parameter, which is just the text that appears on the button. So I'll type enlarge. Next up, we'll do the same thing. bt, we'll have a variable called bt shrink equals a new button with shrink as the text. Next up, we're going to add these two buttons to the horizontal box. Now remember, to do this, we get the list of children that belong to the hbox, and then we just add our two buttons to that list. So hbox.getChildren.add. Remember, getChildren returns our list, so we can automatically just quickly go .add without having to do anything in between. bt large. bt shrink. Okay, so our two buttons are stored inside our horizontal box. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump around a little bit in this video, but that's okay. What we're going to work on now is getting our circle to display on the screen. And the way we're going to do this is to write a class that extends from a pane. So what we're going to do is write our own pane for storing the circle, and this is going to have methods for making the circle bigger and smaller. Very simple, but let's go and code that up now. What we're going to do is down at the very bottom of our file, outside of the control circle class declaration, we're going to have another class. And we'll call this circle pane. And what we're going to do is extend from stack pane, which is another pane available to us in JavaFX. Okay. Now what we're going to do is have our constructor, which just creates a circle object that we're going to add to the pane. So you'll see what I mean. First, what we're going to have to do is declare our variable to store the circle. And this is going to be a private variable, remember, because we're encapsulating our data correctly. It's a circle. And we're immediately going to initialize this to a new circle object with the radius of 50 to start with. Next up, we need our constructor. So public circle pane, no parameters to our constructor. And what we're going to do is get the children list of our circle pane. So get its list and then automatically add the circle object that we just created, that we statically initialized, to the list of children. So that means it'll get drawn whenever our circle pane gets drawn, and we don't have to write any specific code for that, which is great. So the way we do this is to just go get children dot add circle. We don't have to worry about circle being null because we've initialized it up here. Next up, we're going to set some properties of our circle to get it to draw how we want. So we're going to set the stroke, or the outline if you like. I need to, set stroke. And we're going to set it to black. So just color.black. And we're going to set the fill to white. Okay, and that's all we need inside our constructor. All that remains is to add methods for enlarging and shrinking our circle. So we're going to have a public method called enlarge. And all we're going to do is increment whatever the radius currently is by 2. So circle.setRadius. So we have to get the current radius, so circle.getRadius, and then simply add 2 to it. And that is all we need inside our enlarge method. Now, our shrink method is going to be very similar. However, we just have to make sure that we don't accidentally put in a minus value, a negative value for our radius. So what we're going to do is have our method, public void shrink. Now, what we're going to do is set the radius. Circle.setRadius. So far, so good. But what we're going to have in here, instead of just having a value, we're going to actually use the ternary operator. So we're going to get the current radius and then have a comparison. So remember, the ternary operator is like saying if circle.getRadius is greater than 2, then the question mark, I like to think of the question mark as then, circle.getRadius minus 2, else circle.getRadius. Okay, so what this is basically doing is, excuse me, I just dropped my stylus. We're setting the radius, but if the current radius is equal to or less than 2, then, sorry, if the current radius is greater than 2, then we subtract 2 from it. Otherwise, we leave it the same. So we're just returning get radius as the else there. So now we have a pane that draws a circle, and we can add this to our GUI window. So now what we're going to do is work on aligning all these things inside our program. So what we're going to do back in our control circle class is create a circle pane object. So we'll automatically initialize this like that. So now we have a circle pane object that we can add to our layout. So what we're going to do is create a border pane. Now, if you haven't dealt with a border pane before, what it does is it allows us to very easily arrange things in a window. So it provides us options for adding things to the top of the window, to the bottom of the window, to the left, to the right, and to the center. So what we're going to do is position our buttons in the bottom part of the window and our circle in the center part of the window. Now, because we don't have anything added in here, this doesn't take up any space. It's just available to us if we want it. So let's get started on that part. What we're going to do is create a new border pane object. Default constructor is fine. And what we're going to do is set the center object of our border pane to our circle pane. So we use the set center method, and this takes a node which can be our circle pane object. We're going to do exactly the same thing to the bottom part of the window to add our buttons. So border pane.setBottom to be our horizontal box which contains our buttons. Perfect. Next up, we're going to set the alignment of our border pane so that everything is nicely, so our horizontal box is centered in its available space. So border pane.setAlignment, our H box is going to be positioned in the center, like that. So next up, we can get this displayed on the screen. So all we need to do is create a new scene object, which takes our border pane as its main component. We'll set the size of the window to 200 by 150, and then we'll add this to our primary stage. So we'll set the title first, actually. And next we'll add our scene to be the one we just created. And then we'll show this. Alright, so what we'll do next is quickly add a main method so that Eclipse will run our program. Okay, so now we can run our program. Oh, there's a couple of errors here because, well, I typed this wrong. The variable name should be nlarge. And this one is underlined because we haven't pressed Control Space to get our import there. So the errors are now gone. So let's run this. And you can see we have our window on screen. However, at the moment, nothing happens when we press the buttons. This is the part where we get to deal with event handlers. So event handlers allow us to listen for events from other parts of our program. For example, a button will automatically notify all of its event handlers when it's been pressed. So what we're going to have to do is the following. We're going to create an we're going to create an inner class inside our control circle class called enlargeHandler. And this is going to implement the event handler interface. So implements event handler. Okay, and we're going to listen for action events. Alright, inside this class, we need to implement a handle method which actually takes in the action event that has just occurred. So the way we do this is to have a method public void handle, and it takes an action event as its parameter. And all we're going to do in here is call enlarge on our circle pane. Alright. What do we need? Oh, we need to import that. Why is that complaining? Okay, so it turns out maybe we shouldn't be quite so confident in letting Eclipse do our code completion, especially for the import. So what this error is, it's not entirely obvious at all. However, the problem is you can see here that it's imported java.awt.event.actionEvent. So AWT is kind of an older library used for GUI programming in Java. What we want is actually JavaFX.event.actionEvent. So now when we do this, all our errors disappear. And so what we have is our enlarge handler using action event as its type. And then we set our new enlarge handler and we don't have any errors. Fantastic. Sorry about that. It's good to learn though, especially if you're using Eclipse. This may have caught you by surprise. However, now we can run our program. And you can see when we press enlarge, the circle is indeed getting bigger. Nothing will happen with shrink yet because we have to do the same thing for shrink. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste this entire class, inner class here. Call it something different like shrink handler. And what we're going to do inside our handle method is call shrink on our circle pane. Next up, we copy this. Call shrink. Sorry, use our BT shrink variable and use our shrink handler. So now when we run our program, the shrink button works as well. So with that, that's it for this video. We've learned how to use event handlers in JavaFX to make programs that respond to user input. Thanks a lot.